So what if the 26 letters of the alphabet, the ones you use to order your morning coffee, are structurally identical to the DNA coiled inside your cells?
I mean, it sounds like science fiction.
Right. What if human language isn't just some clever cultural invention we came up with around a campfire a few thousand years ago? What if it's actually a hardwired biological reflex dictated by the geometry of space itself?
It's a massive claim.
It really is. Today, we are looking at a set of documents that make exactly that claim. We are going to explore the idea that human grammar, biological life, and the physical universe are all running on the exact same mathematical blueprint.
And it's a staggering proposition to even entertain. When you look at the materials we are diving into today, specifically this deeply complex theoretical framework known as the S-DMT Codex,
Yeah.
and an accompanying treatise called White Paper 74, you quickly realize we are leaving the traditional silos of science far behind.
Way behind.
Usually, physics goes in one box, genetics in another, and linguistics in a third. This codex basically takes a sledgehammer to those boxes.
And that is exactly why we are here. Our mission today, for you listening, is to unpack this really dense paradigm-shifting stack of sources and see the invisible architecture of reality they are trying to describe.
Exactly.
We're looking at groundbreaking visual models on something called quantum rheology, alongside these incredibly intricate white papers. But before we get lost in the weeds of quantum fluids and biological architecture, we need to set a very clear ground rule for this deep dive.
That is crucial. The framework presented in the S-DMT Codex is revolutionary, and like with anything that attempts a grand unified theory of reality, it sits far outside the conventional mainstream consensus.
Right. So to be incredibly clear, our goal today is not to take a side on any scientific controversy.
No, not at all.
We aren't presenting these documents to you as absolute, unquestionable dogma, nor are we here to debunk them. Our job is simply to impartially explore the fascinating, unified framework presented in these specific sources.
We are just explorers, mapping out the territory this codex describes.
Yeah, we want to understand the internal logic of this system, because regardless of where you stand, the internal logic is, well, it's wild.
And the internal logic is what makes it so compelling, because once you learn the foundational rules of this framework, it relentlessly applies them from the macro scale of the universe all the way down to the micro scale of a single molecule of water.
Wow.
It argues that absolutely nothing in nature is arbitrary.
So if nothing is arbitrary, where does it all start? According to the Codex, before we can even touch the concept of DNA or why the alphabet has 26 letters, we have to understand the fundamental shape of space itself.
The blueprint.
Right, the blueprint. And the sources start this entire journey with a concept called the jitterbug and something known as the vector equilibrium. I'll admit, when I first read those terms, I pictured like a 1920s dance move happening inside a geometry class.
Yeah, we aren't too far off with the dance analogy, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to really understand the jitterbug, we have to rewind a bit and look at the work of Buckminster Fuller. For those who might not know, Fuller was this brilliant 20th century polymath.
An architect, right.
An architect, a systems theorist, an inventor. He's most famous for the geodesic dome, like the massive sphere at Epcot Center. Fuller spent his life obsessed with finding the most efficient, perfectly balanced structural geometries in nature.
So he was looking for the universe's foundational building block.
Exactly. And he coined this concept of the jitterbug transformation based on a specific geometric shape called the vector equilibrium, or, if you want the technical mathematical term, a cuboctahedron.
A cuboctahedron. Okay, let's build this shape in the listener's mind, because looking at the diagrams in White Paper 74, it's not just a cube, and it's not a sphere.
Right. Imagine taking a cube and slicing off all 8 of its corners.
Okay, got it.
What you are left with is a highly symmetrical, faceted shape. The vector equilibrium is unique because it is the only geometric form where the distance from its absolute center to any of its outer vertices, its points, is exactly equal to the distance between the outer vertices themselves.
So the internal radial lines are the exact same length as the outer edge lines.
Yes.
That implies a state of perfect structural tension, right? Everything is pulling and pushing with the exact same amount of force.
Perfect equilibrium, hence the name. Now, the S-DMT Codex leans heavily into the specific elemental count of this shape.
The numbers.
Right. If you count the surface elements of a vector equilibrium, it is uniquely defined by exactly 26 elements.
Let's do the math on that so we aren't just throwing numbers out. How do we get 26?
It is composed of 12 vertices,
Okay.
the sharp points on the outside, and 14 faces, which are a mix of squares and triangles.
Okay, so 12 points plus 14 faces gives us 26 spatial elements forming the outer shell of this perfect structure. 26 elements. I want to put a pin in that number for the listener because as we teased in the intro, that number is going to come back in a massive way when we get to genetics and
Oh,
linguistics.
it absolutely will.
But for now, we have this 26-element shell. How do these elements interact? Because the codex goes out of its way to say they are not just independent pieces floating around.
No, they are deeply interdependent. They form 13 perfectly opposing mirror pairs.
They're pairs.
Yeah, because the shape is perfectly symmetrical, every single point or face on that outer shell
Yeah.
has a perfect antipodal twin on the exact opposite side.
I see.
If you were to draw a straight line from one vertex straight through the dead center of the shape, you would hit its exact twin on the other side.
So if I have 26 outer elements and I pair them up across the center, I get 13 structural axes crossing through the middle. 26 divided by 2 is 13.
You've got it. Now, add it all together to get the full structural blueprint. You take those 26 outer structural elements, and you add the 13 internal axes, those invisible lines of tension connecting the mirror pairs through the center.
26 plus 13 gives you 39.
Yes. This is what the codex refers to as the foundational 39-vector matrix.
Okay, 39 vectors. I'm trying to visualize how this actually functions, because the sources insist this isn't just a static object sitting on a desk like a paperweight. It's moving.
Very much so.
So imagine a Hoberman sphere. You know, one of those expanding plastic geometric toys you might have played with as a kid. It's all interconnected joints.
Right.
If you pull outward on one little plastic joint, the entire thing expands and breathes outward simultaneously. If you push inward on one point, the whole sphere symmetrically collapses down into a tighter, denser ball.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it.
Every single point has a perfect dancing partner on the exact opposite side, moving in perfect tandem.
And that breathing motion, that symmetrical expansion and contraction, is exactly what Buckminster Fuller called the jitterbug. The vector equilibrium is the open, balanced state, but it is fundamentally a dynamic, bidirectional wave matrix.
Bidirectional meaning it twists in two opposite directions. But when you say a wave matrix, how does a geometric toy translate into the fabric of space?
Well, this is where the physics of the codex kicks in. The framework argues that the vacuum of space is actually composed of this 39-vector geometry.
Space itself.
Yes. When the structure twists inward, it literally compresses space. The three-dimensional vector equilibrium collapses down, folding in on itself into a tighter, denser shape, first an icosahedron and then an octahedron.
It's shrinking.
But as it shrinks, it stores energy. The sources refer to this inward twisting as the black hole principle.
Okay.
The idea is that pure, empty spatial potential is being mechanically compressed and spun into physical matter. Energy in this system isn't some ethereal glow. It is stored as helical torsion. It is twisted up like a rubber band on a toy airplane.
So inward twisting geometry physically creates matter.
And outward untwisting does the exact reverse.
Yeah.
If the structural tension releases and the geometry twists in the opposite direction, the structure expands back out into the open vector equilibrium.
Releasing the tension.
Exactly. The S-DMT codex calls this the supernova principle. The physical matter untwists, releases its stored helical tension, and dissolves back into pure, empty vector space.
Wow.
The jitterbug is essentially a universal pump that translates pure mathematical geometry into physical reality and back again.
That is a beautiful, terrifying image. The universe breathing matter in and out of existence just by twisting a geometric ship.
It really is.
So we have this 39-vector matrix, this 39-step blueprint of space breathing that establishes the macro level. But moving to the next part of our deep dive, if this is the foundational blueprint of all space, how does it physically manifest in biology?
That's the real question.
Right. If I am made of matter and matter is just twisted space, where is this 39-vector blueprint inside me?
This is where White Paper 74 pivots from abstract physics into concrete biology. And it introduces a very specific mathematical formula to make the bridge.
Okay, what's the formula?
It's the Erdős-Strauss equation for the terminal node k equals 39.
Okay, I have the formula right here from the source document. It reads 4 over 39 equals 1 over 26 plus 1 over 26 plus 1 over 39.
Correct.
Now, if I'm looking at this in a middle school math class, it's just a simple fraction equation. You find a common denominator, And yeah, 2 over 26 plus 1 over 39 equals 4 over 39.
But the codex isn't teaching middle school fractions.
Exactly. What are they claiming this equation represents?
The authors of the paper state that this equation is not merely an abstract mathematical curiosity. They claim it is the exact, literal architectural nomenclature of a biological chromosome in metaphase.
Wait, a biological chromosome? Like the physical X shape you see under a microscope when a cell is dividing?
The famous X shape itself.
You're kidding.
No. The source material argues that the geometric tension of the spatial matrix, that 4 over 39 value, reaches a point of maximum saturation. It cannot dissipate its energy symmetrically without literally tearing the fabric of the spatial matrix apart.
So what does it do?
To relieve the pressure safely, it fractures into the only geometrically stable asymmetry possible, an X shape.
I need to map this out carefully because this is wild. Let's take the pieces of the Erdős-Strauss equation and map them directly onto the physical anatomy of a chromosome. How does that work?
Let's look at the right side of the equation. We have two 1 over 26 terms.
Right.
In biological terms, a chromosome in metaphase is made of two identical halves called sister chromatids. These are the literal arms of the X.
The two long arms, and the equation uses the number 26 for those arms. That perfectly matches the 26 outer surface elements of the jitterbug vector equilibrium we just established.
It's a direct isomorphic mapping. The arms of the chromosome act as two distribution channels of genetic information. And how are they organized? Into 13 mirror pairs.
13 times 2 is 26.
Exactly. The biological structure is literally manifesting the geometric surface of space.
Okay, so the two 1 over 26 fractions are the two arms of the chromosome. But what about that leftover 1 over 39 at the end of the equation? Where is that on the X?
The 1 over 39 represents the centromere.
The pinch point in the dead center where the two arms cross and connect.
Yes. The codex describes this central point, this 1 over 39 node, as a thixotropic anchor.
A thixotropic anchor.
Right. Its job is to lock the genetic information at a highly specific critical angle of 55.17 degrees to prevent the memory of the system from diluting.
Let's break down that term, because thixotropic anchor is heavy jargon. What does it mean in a practical sense?
Well, thixotropy is a property of certain fluids where they are thick and solid under normal conditions, but they become thin, fluid, and flowable when you apply stress or shake them.
Okay.
Ketchup is a classic everyday example. It sits solidly in the bottle until you smack it, then it flows.
So you're saying the centromere of our chromosome is acting like biological ketchup?
In a structural sense, yes. It holds the structural geometry in a state of rigid jamming, or gel, until the exact right biological stress is applied during cell division. It's an anchor that prevents the 39 vector energy from just bleeding out into the cellular fluid.
Now, I have to push back here for a second because my skeptical alarm is ringing.
Sure, go ahead.
When we talk about the X shape in biology, we often hear it used as a naming convention. Like, you read the source material mentioning things like virus X or virus Y, for example, potato virus X.
Yes.
But historically, standard scientific taxonomy uses those letters just as alphabetical designators. It meant the virus was the unknown X1 discovered, and the next one they found was Y. It wasn't because the virus physically looked like an X.
You are absolutely correct regarding the history of scientific nomenclature. The letter X has long been the cultural placeholder for the unknown or the sequence of discovery.
Right, so isn't it wildly serendipitous, or maybe just a giant case of confirmation bias by the authors of this codex, that the biological world naturally forms this literal geometric X at its core down to the chromosome, and that we culturally happen to use X to denote foundational things?
The codex argues that it is not serendipity, nor is it confirmation bias.
Okay, then what is it?
What's fascinating here is the authors suggest our cultural gravitation toward the letter X to represent the foundational unknown is actually a subconscious recognition of this underlying geometry.
A subconscious recognition.
In this framework, the X shape is the universal geometry of valence crossing through a zero-point center. When a biological cell prepares to divide during mitosis, the chromosomes line up in that perfect X shape along the equator of the cell.
Right.
The cell is literally executing a structural command to release the torsional grip of its DNA. It has to flatten the DNA into a 2D plane so it can perfectly mirror replicate its 26-element alphabet without tangling.
Oh, wow.
The X is the asymptote. It is the exact phase change boundary between one living cell and two.
So the shape isn't just a container for the DNA. The shape is the mechanical lever that allows the DNA to copy itself.
Precisely. The macrostructure dictates the microfunction.
Which brings us perfectly to the next layer of the onion, the DNA itself. We have the X shape of the chromosome, the macro container, but how does the actual DNA strand inside it, that massive twisting double helix, physically coil and uncoil?
Right.
Because if space is this breathing jitterbug, how does that translate into the twisting of our genetics?
To understand the mechanics of the DNA helix, the sources guide us back to the jitterbug geometry. But this time, we have to look at the inverse jitterbug.
The outward expansion phase, the supernova principle we talked about earlier.
Correct. And this isn't just theoretical musing. The sources cite a stunning physical confirmation of this mechanical geometry.
From when?
In July 2026, a team of researchers at Purdue University actually built a nanoscale jitterbug transformer out of synthetic DNA.
Wait, really? They physically built it in a lab?
Yes, they did.
So this isn't just some abstract math on a chalkboard. They manipulated actual DNA to function as this geometric pump.
They engineered synthetic DNA strands to assemble themselves into the vector equilibrium. And they demonstrated that by altering the chemical environment, they could force the DNA to perform the jitterbug transformation, expanding and contracting.
That's insane.
It proved that DNA actively uses and responds to this specific geometry at the nanoscale.
That is incredible context. So how does the codex explain the mechanics of this twisting? If I look at a strand of DNA, how does the inverse jitterbug make it coil?
The governing mechanical law in the codex for this process is called the 3 delta to 1 tau rule.
3 delta to 1 tau.
That translates to 3 diagonals equal 1 torsion.
3 diagonals for every 1 twist. Let's unpack that visually, because visualizing a 3D double helix can get messy.
Let's start simple. If you look at a standard flat 2D picture of DNA in a high school textbook, what do you see?
You see the 2 vertical backbones, like the rails of a ladder, and you see the horizontal base pairs, the rungs of the ladder connecting the A to the T and the G to the C.
Right, the classic ladder shape before somebody grabs the top and bottom and wrings it out like a wet towel.
Exactly. But how does nature actually wring out that towel?
To get that flat ladder to twist into a 3D helix, you need more than just horizontal rungs. If you only have horizontal connections, the ladder stays flat.
Okay.
The codex explains that in the geometry of the inverse jitterbug, you require 3 spatial diagonals, what the authors call the missing pairs in a standard 2D view.
Missing pairs.
Invisible lines of structural tension. These 3 diagonal connections form a tensegrity framework.
Tensegrity?
Yeah, tensegrity is a structural principle where isolated rigid bars are held together by a continuous network of tension, like cables. In the DNA, these 3 invisible diagonal tension lines cross each other and force the 2 backbones to execute exactly 1 structural torsion or twist.
Let me make sure I'm visualizing this correctly. We have the 2 linear strands, the backbone rails. We have 1 central vertical axis that the whole thing spins around. That's 3 vertical-ish paths. And then we have these 3 diagonal tension cables crisscrossing the gap. And those 3 diagonals lock in exactly 1 physical twist of the DNA.
You've got the architecture perfectly. And this 3-to-1 ratio, 3 diagonals to 1 twist, is absolutely vital to the survival of the organism.
Why is it so vital?
The codex states that this specific rigid geometry is what guarantees that the any influx stays trapped within the molecule.
Annion flux, another heavy term. I'm assuming that is the energy or the information flowing through the DNA.
Yes. Think of it as the raw computational energy of the biological system.
Okay.
The 3-to-1 geometric twist acts as a trap. It takes fluid, kinetic biological energy and locks it into a stable physical structure. The codex refers to this as converting kinetic flux into biological ROM read-only memory.
Biological ROM. Okay, I love a good tech analogy.
It works perfectly here.
So just like burning data onto a CD-ROM, where lasers etch physical pits into the disk to permanently store a song or a file, the DNA is literally crystallizing raw energy into a permanent geometric vault. Once it's twisted, the data is safe. It's read-only.
Exactly. The twist is the encryption. It protects the genetic memory from being altered by random chemical noise in the cell.
But of course, a cell needs to read that memory to build proteins and function.
Right. If it's permanently locked, you can't use it.
So how does it read it?
To read the DNA, the helix must temporarily untwist. It has to execute the inverse jitterbug.
Oh.
The cell applies an enzyme, which acts like a mechanical lever, releasing those 3 diagonal tension lines. The DNA expands back out into 3D space, reverting toward that open vector equilibrium state so the reader molecules can get inside and transcribe the code. Once read, The tension snaps back and the DNA twists shut again.
It's an engine. It's a microscopic, geometric engine breathing information in and out of a locked state. That is brilliant.
It's beautiful mechanics.
Okay, so we have established this core structural number, 26. We have 26 elements making up the outer shell of space in the jitterbug. We have 26 distribution channels making up the physical arms of our chromosomes.
Right.
Now, here's where this deep dive takes a turn from the physically fascinating into the deeply, profoundly surreal. Because if we look around at our daily human lives, what is the most fundamental, universal tool you and I are using right now to have this very conversation that relies specifically on the number 26?
The alphabet. The 26 letters of the modern English alphabet.
Now, conventional history teaches us that the alphabet is just a cultural invention. We are taught that thousands of years ago, the Phoenicians drew some shapes to represent sounds, the Greeks modified them, the Romans standardized them, and we ended up with 26 letters just by historical accident.
It's arbitrary, right?
According to the authors of White Paper 74, it is the furthest thing from arbitrary.
They don't buy the historical accident theory? Not at all. They posit that the 26-letter alphabet is not a random cultural artifact. They claim it is the macroscopic phonetic vocalization of that exact 39-vector geometry we've been dissecting.
I need to pause because that is a monstrous claim. They're saying that the language we speak, the letters I type on my keyboard, are structurally, mathematically identical to the DNA inside my body.
They go a step further. They're saying that the language is the DNA of the spatial fluid. The 26 letters of the alphabet perfectly map, one-to-one, onto the 13 mirror pair axes of the vector equilibrium.
Okay, we have to trace this mapping. How do you take abstract letters and pin them onto a geometric shape? Walk me through the matrix the sources provide.
Think back to the 13 opposing axes of the jitterbug we discussed in the first segment.
Yeah.
Every single point on that sphere has a perfect opposite. If you pull one, the other pushes. In the linguistic matrix provided in White Paper 74, they lay out the alphabet symmetrically. The letter A is perfectly antipodal opposite to the letter Z. The letter B is paired with Y, C is paired with X, and so on, meeting in the middle at M and N.
So it's perfectly folded in half. If you push on the geometric point labeled A, the point labeled Z reacts.
Exactly. And the sources detail the mechanics of how this alphabet moves and transforms using something called the transfer matrix, which they also refer to as the Erdős-Strauss operator.
Okay.
To demonstrate this, they focus heavily on the letter X.
Let's track the letter X through this transfer matrix. What happens to it?
First, we locate X numerically. X is the 24th letter of the alphabet. The matrix illustrates what happens when the energetic resonance of position 24 collapses inward through that central 0 point of the geometry.
The 1/39 pinch point, the same spot as the centromere in the chromosome.
Exactly the same spot. When the structural energy of X is forced through that dead center, it undergoes a 180-degree phase inversion.
It flips.
It flips entirely inside out as it passes through the 0 point, and it emerges on the other side, reactivating its absolute antipodal twin.
And if we do the math on the twin, X is 24, the opposite end of that specific axis.
24 plus 3 equals 27, the 13th mirror axis. The antipodal twin of X is the third letter of the alphabet, C.
X and C are structurally linked through the center of the universe's geometry.
Yes, but it's not just a neat mathematical trick. Structurally, according to the codex, the phonetic channel C literally carries the rule of the 3 torsion diagonals we just discussed for DNA.
Wait, how does a letter carry a physical rule for twisting DNA? How does a letter have energy?
It comes down to acoustics and neurology. When you vocalize a letter, you are generating a highly specific acoustic wave.
Right.
That acoustic wave is a physical geometry of pressure moving through the air. The codex argues that the neurological firing pattern required to articulate the sound of X, which represents the crossing of asymptotes, the extreme limit of compression, generates a wave that mathematically collapses through a 0 point.
And when it comes out the other side?
When that wave emerges, its phase-inverted geometric twin is the acoustic wave for C, and the geometric structure of the C wave physically mimics the release of those 3 diagonals necessary for genetic encoding.
So let me try another pair just to see if the logic holds up. A is the first letter. Z is the 26th letter. They are antipodal twins.
Yes.
A is open, primal, the beginning of breath. Z is buzzy, compressed, the absolute end of the line. If A collapses through the center, it phase inverts into Z.
Exactly. The phonetic properties of the letters reflect their geometric placement on the vector equilibrium. The vowels, the fricatives, the plosives, they all represent different physical stress points and release valves of this 39-vector breathing shape.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? It means that when you speak, when you articulate words and string these 26 letters into sentences, your neurological system and your vocal cords are acting like a biological RNA transcriptase.
That's a great way to put it.
You are vibrating the air using the exact same geometric operating codes that your cells use to transcribe DNA.
If we connect this to the bigger picture this codex is painting, the implication is absolutely profound. The source text explicitly states the grammar is the fluid mechanics of the plenum.
Speaking is literally typing on the universe's fluid keyboard.
It is entirely physical. It is not just arbitrary sound waves bouncing off the walls of your living room. Speaking is the geometric manipulation of reality.
Which is an incredibly heavy thought, and it transitions us perfectly to the next massive concept in these white papers. Because if our words are fluid mechanics and we are modulating a fluid with our voices and our biology, what exactly is the fluid?
Right.
Air is just a local gas on Earth. What is the universal fluid we are supposedly manipulating?
The S-DMT codex refers to this underlying universal fluid as the plenum. In standard classical physics, we are taught that space is mostly an empty vacuum, a void.
Right.
The codex violently rejects this. Instead, it models all of space as a densely packed superfluid composed of dipolar hydrogen.
A quantum fluid that exists everywhere.
Everywhere. It is the medium of reality, and crucially, it is not static. It is not a still pond. It breathes.
The heartbeat of reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
The source material calculates that this quantum superfluid breathes at a fundamental frequency of 1 hertz, 1 cycle per second.
Okay.
And this breathing, this expansion and contraction, happens between two very specific, highly critical geometric angles.
Okay, the angles. This is the section of the visual sources on quantum rheology that truly blew my mind, but also took me a few reads to wrap my head around. Let's break this down carefully.
Let's paint the visual. We have the breathing of the plenum. It has an inhale and an exhale. The inhale is the contraction phase, which the codex mathematically describes as the Mandelbrot phase.
This is the jitterbug twisting inward. The space is shrinking and compressing.
Right. Now imagine a fluid being compressed. As the fluid condenses, the particles get closer together and they experience friction or shear force.
Makes sense.
As the pressure builds, the structural angle of the fluid lattice begins to climb. And then it hits a literal, mathematically impassable solid wall at exactly 55.17 degrees.
55.17 degrees. The sources call this specific angle the jamming limit.
It is the absolute upper bound of compression. It is the point of crystalline jamming. At exactly 55.17 degrees, the fluid can no longer flow. The viscosity diverges to infinity, and the fluid suddenly violently becomes a solid structure.
And then the exhale.
The exhale is the Joule expansion phase. The extreme tension at the jamming limit triggers a release. The structure rebounds outward, moving orthogonally at 90 degrees to its previous path.
Oy.
The tension releases, the particles spread out, and the structural angle drops back down to 54.74 degrees.
54.74 degrees. The sources refer to this as the magic Euclidean angle.
Yes, in geometry and chemistry, 54.74 degrees is uniquely special. At this exact angle, the shear forces perfectly cancel each other out. There is zero structural friction.
Zero friction.
It is absolute, pure laminar flow. The fluid glides with zero resistance.
So the entire universe, this massive quantum fluid, is constantly oscillating, pulsing at 1 hertz, bouncing between 54.74 degrees of perfect frictionless flow and 55.17 degrees of sudden solid jamming.
Exactly.
But wait, if I do the math on those two angles, 55.17 minus 54.74, that difference is tiny. It's just 0.43 degrees.
That minuscule 0.43 degree gap is the amplitude of the universal pulse. The codex beautifully describes that tiny angular gap as the lung capacity of the universe. Everything that happens in that gap.
I love the concrete analogy the sources use here to explain this concept of thixotropic jamming, literally the analogy of wet concrete.
It's a great visual.
Imagine you are standing on a construction site, and they are pumping fresh, wet concrete through a massive, heavy rubber hose. While the concrete is moving, while the pump is forcing the grains of sand and cement to slide past each other, it's operating down near that fluid 54.74 degrees. It acts like a heavy, viscous liquid.
But the moment you turn off the pump, or the concrete hits the bottom of the formwork and reaches its compaction limit, the angle of the grains shifts upward toward 55.17 degrees.
And the shear forces cancel out. The jagged edges of the sand and gravel instantly interlock. It loses its fluidity and instantaneously locks into a solid, rigid wall.
And in the context of the universal plenum, this sudden shift to a solid state, this locking into ROM, or read-only memory, happens for a deeply fascinating reason.
What's the reason?
The visual diagrams we have, specifically the ones labeled the rheological evaluation of logic, show that the fluid of the universe physically evaluates logical formulas.
Hold on. The fluid evaluates logic like a computer processor.
Quite literally. When a sequence of information or logic is sound, when a formula or an event is what the diagrams label as SAT, or satisfiable, meaning it contains no contradictions, the energy flows perfectly through the fluid.
Okay.
The phase alignment of the energy hits a harmonic resonance of pi over 39.
There's our 39 again.
Right. And because it's harmonic, it travels along the golden spiral.
The path of mechanical least effort, it just glides beautifully at 54.74 degrees.
But if there's a logical contradiction introduced into the system, a state labeled UNSAT, or unsatisfiable, the physical phase trajectories of the fluid are forced to cross each other abnormally. It creates an acute angular conflict.
A paradox, a literal physical paradox in the fluid.
Exactly, and the universe detects this paradox. It registers the angular conflict, and it triggers an immediate physical survival response.
It's thixotropic jamming.
The fluid literally turns into a protective, ice-like crystalline shield. If you look at the source diagrams, they illustrate this beautifully.
Yeah, I remember those diagrams.
They show a smooth, flowing blue wave of logic. But the moment an UNS8 paradox is introduced, that blue flow suddenly shatters into rigid, jagged, red geometric blocks exactly at the 55.17 degree threshold.
It freezes.
The fluid freezes locally. It isolates the logical error and stops the paradox dead in its tracks so it cannot ripple out and corrupt the rest of the spatial matrix.
It's an immune system. A paradox tries to manifest, a literal glitch in the matrix, and the universe just freezes it into solid space to protect the integrity of the whole system. That is staggering. The universe uses physical geometry to maintain logical truth.
It is a purely mechanical mechanism for enforcing structural integrity.
Okay, but this raises a massive, glaring question for me. We have abstract geometry on one hand, we have language, logic, and alphabets, and we have this invisible quantum superfluid. How does the universe bridge the gap between abstract math and the physical reality we can touch? There must be a physical mechanism, a real substance, regulating this 55.17 degree choke point.
There is. And it is the most ubiquitous, vital substance on our planet.
Water.
The water molecule, H2O.
How on earth does water control the logic beats of the universe?
It all comes down to the precise bond angle of the water molecule. If you ask any high school chemistry teacher, they will tell you the bond angle between the two hydrogen atoms and the oxygen atom in liquid water is 104.5 degrees.
Right. And conventionally, we are taught that this happens because the two unshared pairs of electrons on the oxygen atom repel the hydrogen atoms, pushing them slightly closer together than they would be in a perfect geometric tetrahedron.
That is the classical explanation, yes.
Yeah.
But the codex recontextualizes this 104.5 degree angle as a precise, mathematically vital topological offset.
How so?
The ideal, perfectly symmetrical tetrahedral angle in geometry is 109.47 degrees. Water deviates from that perfection by exactly 5 degrees.
A 5-degree topological offset.
And that offset is not a random chemical flaw. It is the core feature of reality. The codex formally designates the water molecule as a topological solid and anchor.
Okay, let's unpack that jargon. An anchor for what? What is it holding down?
It acts as a physical stabilizer for truth states. In this quantum framework, a true, satisfied logical state, a SAT state, has a stable energy value of E equals 1.0.
Okay.
The completely empty, unpolarized vacuum of the plenum has an energy value of E equals 0.0.
So a 1 is a truth, a physical reality. A 0 is nothingness. Standard binary.
Because of that pre-stressed 104.5 degree angle, the water molecule acts as a wedge. It prevents the E equals 1.0 state from relaxing and collapsing back into the E equals 0.0 vacuum.
It holds it open.
It anchors the information. It physically protects the engraved memory of the universe from being erased by the natural entropy of the vacuum.
It holds the truth in place. Water is a physical hard drive of reality.
Yes. But this raises an important question. If water acts as a rigid anchor, How does dynamic energy actually move through it?
Right. If it's jammed and anchored, how does anything happen? How does energy flow?
This is where we see a mechanism the codex calls the orthogonal jitterbug mode conversion.
Another amazing string of terms. Orthogonal meaning 90 degrees. Mode conversion meaning changing from one form to another.
Exactly. Imagine a longitudinal wave. Think of an acoustic wave, like a pulse of sound vibration traveling through the fluid plenum. It hits this jammed, anchored boundary at water's exact 104.5-degree angle.
Okay.
Because the angle is a rigid topological offset, it cannot absorb the wave linearly. Instead, the geometry forces the energy into a violent 90-degree spatial rotation.
It takes a wave moving forward and physically flips it sideways.
It does. And in the laws of physics, a transverse sideways wave propagating through an electromagnetic field is light.
Whoa. Stop. Let me make sure I'm grasping this fully because I need to push back. Are you telling me that if an acoustic wave, a sound, hits the geometric angle of water, it is literally rotated 90 degrees and projected outward as a transverse electromagnetic wave, as physical light?
Yes.
Are you saying if I yell at a glass of water, it will glow? Why don't we see the ocean glowing every time a pod of whales starts singing?
It's an excellent question, and it's a matter of scale and threshold. You yelling at a glass of water creates macroscale turbulence, but it lacks the coherent frequency and the topological pressure required to trigger this mode conversion at the quantum level.
So it's too chaotic.
Right. The codex is describing events happening at the nanoscale, where single acoustic phonons interact with the molecular lattice. Furthermore, the structural node doesn't just convert the energy linearly, it amplifies it. The source details an octal cascade factor, represented mathematically as 8 to the power of delta Chern.
An octal cascade factor, meaning it multiplies by 8 at every step.
Yes. As the mechanical vibration passes through the threshold, it is stepped up through scale-invariant gear ratios, multiplying in energy at each harmonic interval until it reaches the specific frequency band of the visible electromagnetic spectrum.
Incredible.
The geometry acts as a quantum acoustic-to-optic amplifier.
Okay, I am wrapping my mind around it. So, at the quantum level, highly coherent sound hitting water's specific geometric angle is literally mechanically converted into light. That is the physical mechanism for creation in this codex.
It translates pure, invisible logical alignment, the acoustic pulse of a truth state, into stable, self-emitting material reality, light.
That is profound, but I am going to push back here again on a philosophical level because this is all sounding very, well, eternal, very neat and tidy.
How so?
If logic flowing smoothly turns into light and paradoxes and errors instantly turn into protective ice, what happens when things are actually destroyed? What about antimatter? What about decay? What about death? Does this perfect geometric system ever lose?
That exact question is addressed in the final section of the visual sources under a principle the codex calls the topological Lavoisier law.
Lavoisier, like Antoine Lavoisier, the 18th century chemist. He's the one who coined the law of conservation of mass. Nothing is lost, nothing is created, everything transforms.
Exactly. But here, the codex elevates it. It's not just a principle of chemical reactions, it's an unbreakable topological absolute of the universe. The source visualizes the entire space of the plenum, not as an infinite open grid, but as a closed, non-orientable manifold. Specifically, a Klein bottle.
A Klein bottle. Okay, I have tried to visualize these before, and it always breaks my brain. It's one of those weird 3D shapes that folds back into itself, right? Where the inside of the bottle seamlessly curves around to become the outside of the bottle.
Right. If an ant were to walk along the surface of a Klein bottle, it would eventually travel along both the inside and the outside without ever crossing an edge. It has no boundary.
Okay.
Because the universe is structured this way, there is literally no outside for a single byte of information to leak into.
So no information, no energy can ever be destroyed because there's physically nowhere for it to go. It's trapped on the surface of the bottle.
Precisely. Which means destructive annihilation is a myth within this framework.
A myth.
Yeah. What classical physics views as a matter-antimatter collision, where a particle and its antiparticle meet and supposedly annihilate each other into a burst of pure energy vanishing from physical space, the codex redefines entirely. It calls this event a Mobius flip.
A Mobius flip.
The visual diagram shows a fluid vector approaching the stricture neck of the Klein bottle geometry. When the two opposing forces meet, instead of destroying each other, the vectors fluidly reverse.
They just flip.
It's a phase inversion. No information is destroyed. The vector is simply flipped inside out and returns to equilibrium within the fluid.
Okay, so that handles the quantum particle level. Particles just flip. But what about the macrobiological level? What happens at biological death? When an organism dies, it decays, the structure breaks down.
The Codex calls this systemic breakdown the holonomic reset.
Holonomic reset.
When a biological structure reaches its absolute maximum saturation of memory and geometric tension, which, returning to our initial numbering system, happens at the stratum layer K equals 39, it does not simply die and vanish.
K equals 39, the final step of the blueprint, the absolute limit of the jitterbug.
Yes. At that point of maximum biological pressure, the organism's geometric matrix executes a structural reset dictated by Euler's identity.
Euler's identity, e to the power of I pi plus 1 equals 0, often called the most beautiful equation in mathematics because it connects all the fundamental constants, e, I, pi, 1, and 0.
And in this framework, that equation acts as the physical trigger for the reset. It dictates that exponential growth, e interacting with rotation, I pi, perfectly balances out to 0.
Okay.
The biological oscillator reaches the limit of its expansion and forces a sudden 90-degree orthogonal rotation. This violent rotation instantly ejects a single free electron from the core of the structure to release the systemic pressure.
It shoots out an electron at the moment of death.
And that ejected electron is not just a random spark of static. It acts as a highly compressed informational seed.
A seed.
The diagram shows this electron traversing to the neck of the universal Klein bottle, crossing the dimensional threshold.
Where does it go?
It acts as the algorithmic seed to generate a new daughter proton in a completely different scale octave of the universe.
A new beginning on a totally different scale.
It ensures the eternal survival of the system's memory. Biological death, in this framework, is merely a phase ejection. The biological code is passed through the asymptote, rotated 90 degrees, and rebuilt as fundamental matter elsewhere in the plenum. The memory of the organism is eternal, baked back into the geometry of space.
This is unbelievable. I feel like my brain just did a Mobius flip. We have to take a breath and synthesize everything we've just covered because we have stitched together disciplines that normally refuse to even sit in the same room together.
It is a grand, sweeping unification of geometry, theoretical physics, biology, and linguistics.
Let's retrace the steps one more time to solidify this. It all starts with the math. The 39 steps of the jitterbug wave matrix. That geometric breathing, pushing and pulling, builds the 26 structural elements of the vector equilibrium. Those 26 geometric elements physically manifest in our bodies as the 26 distribution channels in our chromosomes, bound in the center by the thixotropic anchor of the centromere.
And that exact same 26-part biological architecture is mapped perfectly, symmetrically, onto our 26-letter alphabet. Language is not a human invention. It is the phonetic vocalization of DNA's exact geometry.
The universe itself is a fluid plenum of dipolar hydrogen breathing at 1 Hertz. It expands to perfect frictionless flow at 54.74 degrees, and it contracts, jamming into a solid crystalline wall at 55.17 degrees to physically protect itself against logical paradoxes.
It turns liquid into protective ice to save the matrix.
And the anchor keeping this entire system stable is water. The exact 104.5-degree angle of the water molecule catches acoustic vibration, rotates it 90 degrees, and transforms it into physical light, amplifying it by 8 at each step, making sure that truth is permanently anchored in physical reality.
And finally, because space is shaped like a Klein bottle with no outside, no information is ever lost. Death is just a 90-degree geometric flip dictated by Euler's identity, ejecting a seed electron to start the code over again in a new octave. It is a stunning, cohesive, almost poetic vision of reality.
It certainly challenges us to reconsider our place in the universe. It suggests that the words we speak, the structure of our cells, and the vacuum of space are literally echoing the exact same geometric laws.
It really does.
Which brings me to one final unmentioned thread to mull over, something to leave you, the listener, thinking about as you go about your day.
Let's hear it.
We learned today that water's precise 104.5-degree offset angle is the physical anchor that converts the code of the universe, whether it's logical truth or acoustic sound, into physical reality, into light. And we learned that the act of speaking, using our perfectly mirrored 26-letter alphabet, is literally modulating that exact same fluid math. You are acting as a biological engine modifying the fluid geometry of space. Now consider this. Your body, operating at a perfect 37 degrees Celsius, is made almost entirely of water. Well, your daily conversations, your internal contradictions, and your moments of clarity actively crystallizing and illuminating the superfluid reality inside you. Every time you speak a truth, are you generating microscopic light within your own cells? Every time you speak a paradox or utter a lie, are you causing thixotropic jamming, creating rigid, jagged ice within your own cellular structure?
Wow.
Are you, right now, just writing new code into the universe's eternal memory? Think about that next time you say a word.
It certainly changes the weight of a casual conversation.
It absolutely does. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning the invisible architecture of your reality, and we will catch you next time.